that recently dropped. But my thought just, yeah, I just wanted to, you know, dwell on the fact that they were diverting product through from your, according to your reporting, through the United States mail, and just not even to get specific of the method of which they did it, the fact that they did it. Like, here's a point that I've made on the show a few different times. Citizens like myself have possession limits, and it's very strict how I can transport the cannabis, and I can get in big trouble if I exceed my limits. Meanwhile, everybody that's licensed in Illinois, there's no concept of a transport limit. The transport limit is how much you can fit into a van that you can take to all of your stores, right? And so this is like another way where they're just playing by another set of rules. And what I mean to say is, if we would have done anything like that, like if I would have cultivated cannabis myself and sent it through the mail and was providing it to people, like, these are all things that are explicitly against the law in Illinois. And there's no shadow of, I don't doubt at all that they would try to make an example out of somebody like me, or anybody doing that, because it's easy. But then these companies, like I say, play by a whole different set of rules. I guess just one last thought, Grant, in the spirit of this, is like, we've got cannabis events, right, in the state of Illinois, and they're starting to become more of a thing. And the question has always been, like, how do these vendors get the cannabis there? Because they're not allowed to dispense cannabis except for at a dispensary. So how are they, and if we all have possession limits, how are they getting it there? And so it's interesting. We did find reporting that one particular vendor that works with these companies says that what they do is they have their employees, each purchase their maximum amount and then bring it to the location. Okay, that's all good and well. Gifting is legal in Illinois. But here's my point. They do that multiple times. And so at a certain point, you've got this lump sum of cannabis that's to be used for the event. And it's like, who's in possession of that? How does this work? And I'm just saying, if anybody else did that, they'd probably get in trouble. So it just feels like another case in which we're playing by two sets of rules. That's kind of my thought that I had on that. And maybe you weren't expecting it, but yeah, curious what you
Yeah,
thought.
no, I think you're right. You're right. And I think that for me, I do a lot of anti-trust work, which is to say, I like to break up vertical consolidation or even horizontal consolidation of markets, a la Teddy Roosevelt in 1905 in response to Northern Steel or Standard Oil or otherwise. Um, and what's important to understand about what you're asking is that the power for government agencies to engage with the property of corporate persons is defined by something called the police power. I'm not talking about like the police. I'm talking about the power of a state government to engage in things like fines or other punitive action. Now, as individual human citizens, we are protected by the Bill of Rights. You have a right to a lawyer. You have a right to not incriminate yourself. You have a right against unreasonable search and seizure. You have a right to free speech, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of those rights apply specifically when you're charged with a crime. Now, many people would think, and I fully support people who do think this because it's what I would hope would be the truth, that those rights for individual human beings are stronger than the rights for what we would call an artificial human being, which is to say a corporate person. But that is not true. That is fundamentally not true. And it has to do with there's a great case. It's actually my favorite all time Supreme Court case, not because of the majority holding, but because of the dissent. And it's from 1939. It's called Connecticut General Life Insurance v. Johnson. And in that case, Justice Hugo Black, one of the most renowned Supreme Court justices of all time, writes a dissent. And in that dissent, the dissent starts Mr. Justice Black dissenting, for those of you who want to go read this opinion and find this dissent. Justice Black lays out something that happened in 1886 in the course of another one of my favorite cases, which is Santa Clara County versus Southern Union Pacific. And Justice Black explains how the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution was passed in the wake of the Civil War to protect a race liberated from slavery, the black race in the United States. But what happened was by the 1880s, partially due to the fact that Reconstruction was kind of usurped by the South after Lincoln was assassinated. So kind of from like the presidencies of like Johnson and Grant and Rutherford B. Hayes and Chester A. Arthur and Garfield, all the way up basically until like McKinley in the late 1890s, you have like a very reactionary Congress and Supreme Court that has two perspectives. One, Southern states should be able to basically re-enslave black people in all but name. And two, the corporations should be absolved from any oversight by state governments. And what is the most frustrating part of this, and I would have been screaming it from the rooftops if I were alive, just like Ida Tarbell and Lincoln Steffens and S.S. McClure and a lot of the muckrakers at the time were doing. What was so frustrating was the Supreme Court was saying, hey, listen, this 14th Amendment that Congress passed to protect black Americans, what we actually read it to do is protect corporations. And not only that, we're going to say that that the 14th Amendment means states can't regulate companies. Now, this was called the liberty of contract doctrine, and it lasted all the way until West Coast Hotel v. Parrish in 1937. But I want to talk about one more important thing, which is how this happened. It's when folks read this dissent, I'm not making this up. I'm very theatrical because I like to translate it into modern language. But when you read this dissent, every single thing I have just said, you're going to read in a Supreme Court justice's sort of voice with citations, and it will blow your mind. This part, however, it takes the cake. When the Supreme Court interpreted the 14th Amendment in Santa Clara County versus Southern Union Pacific in 1886, they didn't actually say the 14th Amendment protects corporations. No, what happened was a court reporter's headnote, which is what's called a summation of the decision, included a reference to a secret purpose hitherto unrevealed on the part of the framers of the 14th Amendment to protect corporations during secret negotiations in the lead up to its passage. That is the origin of the constitutional doctrine of corporate personhood, which created the bifurcated conditions that allow corporations to be treated with kid gloves when they violate the law, whereas individual humans are made examples of. It's horrific. It's an absolutely a usurpation of this republic, and it reflects the very worst form of lawmaking that we are now having to, as a grassroots movement, spend decades undoing. And I absolutely 100% blame that reactionary sort of Southern driven Congress and executive from 1863 until the election of McKinley in 1896 for why this happened. And if more folks understood it, I think there would be a more sort of cogent and direct form of discourse about these corporations should be treated the same exact way in terms of law, if not more strictly than we are as citizens.
Gosh, thank you for breaking that down. I did not know that, and so I have a feeling that a lot of my audience just learned a lot too. So